I never expected a night like that to begin in a place as ordinary as the shop where I worked part-time. The sign outside still flickered, one tube always slow to catch the current. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of machine oil and old wood polish. My cousin had asked me to stay late, help with some deliveries, and I said yes without thinking. That's when she took me aside, smiling a little too knowingly, her words laced with something I couldn't quite name. Before I could respond, someone else slipped into the moment, her friend. She stood by the doorway with arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. "He's not yours alone," she said, like I wasn't standing right there. I laughed awkwardly, waiting for someone to say it was a joke, but silence pressed in. That silence stretched further when two strangers, regulars in the neighborhood, walked closer. They didn't look at each other, only at me, like competing magnets drawn to the same pole. Their arguing voices filled the shop, but that's not what I remember most. What I remember is her, the older woman who lingered near the back counter. She hadn't spoken a word yet. Not my cousin, not her friend, not those strangers. Someone else. She was standing with a posture that made the dim light bend toward her, mid-40s, hair pinned loosely as if she didn't need perfection to hold attention. There was something careful in the way she flipped through an old repair log, pretending to read, though I knew she wasn't. I'd seen her a handful of times before. She never hurried, never stumbled. Even in the noise of everyone else, she carried silence like armor. And maybe that's why I noticed when her eyes lifted for a second too long, catching mine. It wasn't a smile, not really. More like a question she didn't intend to ask. I felt my mouth go dry, the kind of dryness that makes words dangerous. I shifted on my feet, wiped a hand on my jeans, and forced myself to look away. My cousin's laughter broke the moment. She nudged me toward a box of parts waiting to be carried out. "Don't just stand there." Her voice sounded far away. My hands obeyed, but my mind stayed where her eyes had met mine. Later, while stacking supplies near the counter, I felt her presence again. She leaned slightly closer than she needed to, pointing at a worn page in the ledger. "They've been overcharging you for months," she said, matter of fact. Her tone was low, steady, the kind that made everything else fade. She tapped the page, her finger brushing mine just enough to spark heat I couldn't explain. I swallowed. "You noticed that?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me as though the real question wasn't about numbers at all. Then she gave the smallest shrug, her earrings catching the faintest glow. "Some things are easy to miss if you're not paying attention." Her words weren't sharp, but they cut anyway, slicing through the haze of voices in the shop. I didn't know if she meant the ledger or something else entirely. I wanted to ask, but my cousin called from the other room, breaking whatever thread had started to tie between us. She straightened, pulled her hand back, and returned to the logbook as though nothing had passed between us. But it had. I knew it had. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. The next day should have felt like any other shift, but it didn't. The shop carried the same smell of varnish and metal filings, the same buzz of the failing light, yet every corner of the room seemed charged. Or maybe that was just me, dragging my cousin's boxes across the floor while stealing glances toward the counter where she stood again. I knew her name now. She had signed the ledger before leaving last night, but saying it in my head felt too intimate, like testing a word that didn't belong to me yet. She wasn't supposed to be here 2 days in a row. She didn't owe us her time. And yet, there she was, sleeves rolled to the elbow, marking figures with a pen she pulled from her own bag, as though the shop belonged to her. I told myself it was nothing, just her helping out, just coincidence. But coincidence doesn't make your chest tighten when someone leans close, or make your eyes track the way a loose strand of hair slips across her cheek. "Your cousin doesn't notice these things," she said suddenly, her voice softer than yesterday's, still bent over the paperwork. "But you do." I froze, my hand resting on the back of a chair. She didn't look up, didn't explain. What do you mean? I asked. Her pen paused. Then she lifted her gaze, not directly at me, but almost like she was measuring how much truth I could handle. Numbers, patterns. You pay attention. People don't expect that from someone your age. That should have been a compliment, but it landed heavier, as though she was naming something I hadn't even admitted to myself. I laughed nervously, scratched at my wrist. I just notice things sometimes. Her eyes flickered. A shadow of something personal there, gone too quickly. Not everyone notices. My ex-husband didn't. The words slipped out of her mouth like she hadn't meant to say them, and for a heartbeat, I wasn't in the shop anymore. I was inside the weight of her silence. She coughed lightly, as if to erase it, and went back to scribbling. But I couldn't forget. I watched her hands move over the page. Steady, controlled. But when she set the pen down, her fingers lingered too long against the paper, pressing as if holding something back. She wasn't just helping with numbers. This was her way of staying busy, of filling a space that someone else had left hollow. And me? I was standing too close, breathing her air, listening too hard. I noticed everything. The faint perfume mixed with dust, the way her laugh lines deepened when she hid a smile, the restless tapping of her foot when she thought no one was looking. Felt dangerous, off limits. She wasn't mine to notice. But when the day was nearly done and my cousin finally stepped out to answer a call, she looked at me. Really looked. You don't have to rush off, she said quietly, resting a hand on my arm. Not long, not heavy, just enough. Stay a little longer. I nodded before I had time to think. Words pushed up my throat. Something I shouldn't say. Something that would change everything. But I swallowed them down. For now. I told myself I'd keep some distance the next time I saw her. But distance doesn't survive when she's already there waiting. Her hair swept into a loose knot, strands slipping free like they refused to be tamed. The shop was unusually quiet. My cousin had gone out for a delivery, leaving just the two of us. The air smelled faintly of coffee and warm dust, the kind of silence that feels like it belongs to someone else. I busied myself stacking old boxes, wiping down tools that didn't need it. She leaned on the counter, watching me more than the ledger this time. Every scrape of metal against wood seemed louder than it should have been. You're quieter today, she said finally. I shrugged, kept my eyes on the rag in my hand. Didn't sleep much. She tilted her head, the smallest smile tugging at her mouth. Thinking too much? That landed closer than I wanted it to. I tried to laugh it off. Something like that. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt weighted, like both of us had chosen not to say something at the same time. When she moved, it was subtle. She reached for a box near me, her fingers brushing mine in the process. Not a deliberate touch, maybe, but I felt it like a spark, running hot up my arm. I dropped the rag, my throat tightening. She froze too, her hand still close, eyes catching mine for longer than safe. And then, for the first time, her voice slipped softer, rawer. You remind me of who I used to be around. The words hung there, unguarded. I didn't know what to do with them. I wanted to ask who she meant, but I was afraid of the answer. Before I could speak, a sharp knock rattled the door. I flinched. She pulled her hand back instantly, straightened, smoothed her blouse like nothing had happened. My cousin's voice carried in, loud and careless, announcing himself as he fumbled with the latch. The moment broke, but it didn't vanish. I felt it thrumming under my skin as I turned back to my meaningless cleaning. Later, when my cousin was distracted with receipts, she leaned in close again. Her perfume, something faint, citrus with warmth, brushed against me. You can't always hold everything in, she murmured, almost too low to hear. I looked at her then, really looked, and I nearly said the thing that had been burning in my chest since the first night. Nearly. Instead, I bit my tongue hard enough to taste iron. Because if I spoke, I wasn't sure I'd stop. When she finally gathered her bag and moved toward the door, she paused, turned halfway back. Her eyes lingered, searching me, like she was waiting for me to break the silence first. I didn't, but the question hung there anyway, unspoken, dangerous. Were we about to cross a line neither of us could return from? The days kept folding into each other, and every time I told myself I'd draw a line, I ended up standing closer to her instead. It was late again, the shop half-lit, humming with the quiet drone of an old fan. My cousin had gone off to meet a supplier, leaving us alone once more. I could almost pretend it was chance, but it wasn't. We both knew. She was seated at the counter, her hands folded on the ledger she hadn't touched in 10 minutes. I stood by the shelf, pretending to fix a latch that didn't need fixing. The silence between us was alive, restless. "You avoid looking at me," she said suddenly. Not accusing, not playful, just bare. I froze. My hand slipped from the latch. "I don't." Her eyes lifted, steady. "You do. Every time." The air felt sharper. I wanted to deny it, but my voice caught in my throat. Maybe because I notice too much when I do. Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her hands pressed tighter together, knuckles pale. "You shouldn't," she whispered, but she didn't move away. I stepped closer, not meaning to, but unable to stop. My chest felt tight, my pulse loud in my ears. "I've tried," I admitted, the words heavier than I thought they'd be. "I can't." Her breath caught. She looked down, shaking her head lightly, but not in rejection. More like she was fighting something inside herself. "This is wrong," she said, though her voice lacked strength. "You're too young." "And me," she trailed off, swallowed, her jaw tightening. "I already made mistakes once. I can't." The rest dissolved into the silence. I should have stopped. I should have stepped back. Instead, I reached out without thinking, brushing the back of her hand with mine, just enough to feel the warmth of her skin. She didn't pull away. Her eyes lifted again, and for a moment, the world outside the shop didn't exist. There was no cousin, no ledger, no rules. Just her gaze holding mine like a question neither of us dared to answer. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said quietly, "but I know I don't want this to end here." Her lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. She stared at me, unblinking, her breathing shallow. And then, the shrill ring of the shop's old landline cut through the room. Both of us flinched, the spell shattering but not gone. The phone rang again, loud, insistent, filling the silence we couldn't break ourselves. Neither of us moved to answer it. Her hand trembled slightly under mine. The phone kept ringing. Finally, she whispered, almost inaudible, "What do you think happens if we stop pretending?" The question hung heavy in the air, more dangerous than any touch. And I had no answer. The phone finally stopped ringing, leaving a silence even heavier than before. I could still feel the warmth of her hand beneath mine, the ghost of a connection neither of us had dared to complete. Then the door creaked open. My cousin stepped inside, muttering about traffic, and the moment collapsed like it had never been. She slipped her hand away before anyone could notice, stood quickly, too quickly, smoothing the papers on the counter as though that was what had held her all along. But her eyes, when they darted back at me, they weren't the same. They carried something unsteady. Later, when my cousin finally ducked into the back to count stock, she leaned toward me again, her voice just above a whisper. "There's something I didn't tell you." The way she said it made my chest clench. I forced a smile. "That sounds serious." "It is." She hesitated, fingers tightening around the ledger. "I knew you before you ever noticed me. You don't remember, but I've seen you grow up. I was close to your family. Your mother. She used to bring you here when you were little. The words hit me harder than I expected. A flicker of memory stirred. A smaller version of this shop, the smell of paint thinner, and a woman laughing with my mom near the counter. I hadn't placed it until now. You knew me back then? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her eyes soft but restless. And that's why this is dangerous. Because it feels like I'm crossing something I promised myself I never would. The air between us shifted. The tension that had felt forbidden before now carried weight, history, almost a betrayal of time itself. I stepped back, trying to find words that wouldn't betray the storm in my chest. So, what are we doing? Her lips pressed tight, like she hated the question. We're trying not to ruin each other. But I couldn't let it end there. You don't look like someone who wants to stop. Her eyes flashed, with anger, with fear, maybe both. And you don't sound like someone who knows what this will cost. Before I could answer, my cousin's voice cut in again, casual, unknowing. Hey, can you two lock up tonight? I've got somewhere to be. He tossed me the keys, not even glancing at us. The door shut behind him, leaving us alone. The keys burned cold in my palm. She stared at me, her expression unreadable, torn between retreat and something far more reckless. You don't understand, she said finally, voice trembling for the first time. I made a promise years ago, to your mother, to myself, that I'd never cross that line with you. Her words should have closed the door, but instead, they cracked it wider, because I hadn't even known the line existed until now. I swallowed hard, the weight of her confession crushing and intoxicating all at once. And before I could stop myself, I whispered back, then why does it feel like we already have? The keys felt heavy in my hand long after my cousin left. The shop was too quiet, shadows stretching long across the floor, the hum of the fan suddenly unbearable. She stood across from me, arms folded like she needed them to hold her together. I should have said something casual, let her go, ended it clean. But the weight between us had grown too large for small talk. You don't have to stay, I said, though my voice betrayed me. Her eyes lifted, searching me, as though she could see the words I didn't say. And if I want to? I swallowed, my pulse sharp in my ears. Then you already know what happens. She exhaled, slow, almost a laugh but not quite. You think this is simple? That it's just attraction? It isn't. It's years of mistakes I swore I'd never repeat. Her voice cracked on the last word. For the first time, she didn't sound in control. I stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough to feel the heat between us. I don't care about your mistakes. I care about right now. She shook her head, eyes glistening. You don't understand. When I left my marriage, I told myself no more risks. No more being the reason someone else regrets. And here you are, looking at me like I'm the only thing in the room. The words broke something open in me. My chest ached with the truth I had tried to bury. Because you are. The silence that followed was brutal. Her lips parted, her hand twitching like she almost reached for me, then stopped. Couldn't hold it back anymore. Every night, I replay the way you look at me, the way you pause before walking away. It doesn't feel like nothing. And if I'm wrong, tell me now. End it. Her eyes locked on mine, fierce and fragile all at once. She stepped forward, so close I could see the fine lines near her eyes, the tremor in her breath. You think I don't want this? She whispered. I do. God help me, I do. But I'm terrified of what it makes me. I reached out, not thinking, just feeling. My hand brushed her arm, lightly, like asking permission. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her forehead nearly against mine. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't words. It was something in between, a fragile space where both of us existed without pretending. Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. If we cross this line, nothing goes back. Do you understand that? I nodded, my throat tight. I don't want to go back. The fan hummed, the lights buzzed, the world went on outside, but inside the shop, there was only us. And then she closed her eyes, letting her forehead rest against mine in a gesture so tender it felt more intimate than anything else could have been. Neither of us spoke, but everything had already been said. The next morning, the shop smelled the same, varnish, dust, and faint coffee lingering from the night before, but it felt different. Nothing had changed outside, but inside, everything had. She arrived before I did, settling at the counter with the same casual grace. Yet something in her eyes told me she hadn't slept. I caught her gaze, and for a moment we didn't speak, just looked. Shared the memory of a night that had shifted everything between us without a single word fully spoken. "I thought last night might have been a mistake," she said finally, voice low, steadying herself. "But it wasn't." I nodded, not trusting my voice at first. Neither was it a beginning, or an ending, just something real. She smiled faintly, eyes tracing the lines of the ledger, her hands lingering on the worn paper. "I don't know what we'll do with it," she admitted, "but I do know we can't pretend it didn't happen." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "We'll figure it out, slowly." And that was the truth. Nothing had been solved, nothing promised, but the weight had shifted. There was a new understanding between us, one built on honesty, tension, and the risk of being seen for who we were. I noticed her fingers brush the edge of the counter as she adjusted herself, the same way they had brushed mine days ago, deliberately unnoticed yet impossible to forget. Small gestures, tiny connections that had become our language. "I'll come back tomorrow," I said, trying to sound casual. But I didn't need to add anything. She knew. We had crossed a threshold without stepping over it fully. We had admitted truths without spelling out the consequences. And in that admission there was freedom. She glanced at the door, then back at me. "We've changed each other," she said softly. "Even if nothing else happens." I nodded again, heart tight. Even if nothing else happens. The clock ticked on, the fan hummed lazily, and life outside continued. But in that quiet shop, everything felt heavier, lighter, and infinitely more real. We would carry this night forward, a shared secret, a tension unresolved, and yet a gift. The kind of human moment that lingers, even when the world demands pragmatism and distance. And as I left the shop, the memory of her near touch, her quiet honesty, and the unspoken question of what might come next followed me. It was not perfect. It was messy. It was entirely human. And maybe that was enough.